Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Наші
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 513 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again, and I live.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And I hate that we weren't able to run a stream yesterday. I do want to apologize for that. Matthew wasn't feeling that great, so we decided to take a sick day there. That's actually quite rare and has been only happening really over the past 2 or 3 weeks. But we are back, and of course, the situation is starting to evolve in very interesting ways, not just in Ukraine, but around the nations that are just outside of Ukraine. And that brings us into tonight's massive news. Many of you all know that the last week we were covering news, the Wagner unit had moved into Belarus, and they had made it clear that they were not going to be returning back to combat in Ukraine. They were going to be staying in Belarus and helping to train the Belarusian army. It now appears that, according to U.S. intelligence from the Department of Defense, that these Wagner soldiers, quote-unquote, aren't really Wagner soldiers. They are actually soldiers of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and they are being moved onto the border with Belarus. There has also been some rumors floating around out there that actual Russian Ministry of Defense forces are on the border as well, and the situation is starting to get quite severe. Poland has, even today, started to move their own forces towards the border region, and we're now starting to see an armed standoff in between the Russian-aligned pact in between Belarus and the Russian Federation and the Polish forces, along with a small coalition of international countries. We heard from Russia today, well, more so Putin directly, this interesting statement. This was once again stated by the Kyiv Post, but he said that that Poland has forgotten that Polish Western territories were a gift from Stalin, but Russia will remind it. And that is a very ambiguous statement right there, but a very threatening one, to say the least. This is a part of Putin's overall imperialistic goals for the Russian Federation to take back the lands in Ukraine, Poland, as well as the Baltics, to reform what could really be considered in the modern day a Russian empire. We can also hear the other statements that he said that will probably age like milk. Poland seized part of Lithuania, took away its historical lands from Russia, took advantage of the Civil War, and participated in the division of Czechoslovakia. Which I don't really think it did any of that. I don't know when it seized part of Lithuania, because you see, the modern Polish borders, the way they exist right now, were actually carved up, they were in fact carved up by Stalin at the end of the Second World War. And there is a large amount of Poland, including a decent amount of Ukraine, a decent amount of Belarus, as well as a decent amount of Lithuania as well, that would be a part of Poland if the borders were shaped correctly. But that didn't happen, and so the Polish borders exist the way they do right now. So I don't know why he's saying that they seized a part of Lithuania, because going under the same logic that his first statement has, the Russians were the ones that seized Lithuania and then gave it to Poland. But anyways, the West plans to send Polish and Lithuanian fighters for quote-unquote meat in Ukraine, and Poland leaders seek to set up a coalition under the NATO umbrella and intervene in the conflict in Ukraine. Aggression against Belarus will mean aggression against Russia. And then we can see a picture of the decrepit weirdo right there as he is giving these statements. This is all.
You know, the goofy part about all those statements from Putin is, even if Poland's land supposedly was a gift from Stalin, even if we take him at his word on that, that all happened in the past. Now it's Poland's land, so what's his point?
I don't even know what is his point, because it's like, way back in the day, the Mongolians owned all of Russia, so do they own that now, or what? And it just doesn't make any sense, because these kinds of claims could be used by any country to claim land anywhere at this point, because every single country in the world, at some point historically, had borders larger than the ones they have right now. So really any country, including Lithuania, could claim practically all of Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus as a part of their modern-day territories if they wanted to, revive the historical claims that Polish-Lithuania had. But you can't do that kind of stuff, especially not in the modern world. This isn't a world where people have to give up land of their nations that they've had for decades or centuries now, just because at some point in history another country controlled it. It just makes no sense. That is Polish sovereign territory at this point, and it will remain that way. Speaking of which, moving on into Poland itself, we saw that there's a lot more British equipment sitting inside of Poland that will be making its way to Ukraine. Of course, a continued part of Poland supporting Ukraine, and also showing that quote-unquote aggression that they've been showing the Russians this entire time.
Тут ми бачимо різні варіанти бронемашин «Спартан».
Most of these are Spartan armored personnel carriers.
Які вони найближчим часом поїдуть до України. Цей факт вже вирішений.
And we can see that they're all in fairly good shape. There's something around 40 new FV-103 Spartans that will be delivered to Ukrainians here over the next few weeks. We now see them driving them. And that's the end.
Well, they're pretty capable.
They look like they are pretty capable, and hopefully it'll be helping the Ukrainians to move more of their soldiers up to the front line in relative safety. Moving on from that, another thing that is starting to appear that the Western world, or NATO as a whole, is ending up in a state of escalation with the Russians is not only the military buildup in Poland, where we've been, of course, hearing about the armed standoff that is starting to occur in that direction, but the Turks have arrived once again into the talks of the grain ships that were heading to Ukraine under the Grain from Ukraine deal that was made in between Russia and Ukraine last year. According to information that we were getting a few days ago, the Turks actually backed out of their initial statement that they were going to be giving armed escorts to merchant ships that were heading into Ukrainian waters to pick up grain. That's at least what we had heard a few days ago. Erdogan has now come out today, and he's actually made a statement that the Turks are once again going to not hesitate to take action to prevent harmful effects of grain deal suspension. And this was in response to Putin's recent warning to Turkey that it will not allow the escort of Ukrainian grain ships. And to get a better idea of what was said then, the Russians said it wouldn't be a smart idea for the Turks to do something like that, and it now appears that Erdogan is stepping back up again and making the same statement that was made about a week or two ago that they then backed off of around 4 days ago. And so now, once again, they're starting to make that statement. Whether they follow through on that or not is one thing, but the Russians are starting to take this quite seriously, as reports were coming out today that some of the Black Sea Fleet was underway and went to sea to engage in firing exercises against floating objects and also seizing ships. We can see a picture here of some of the Black Sea Fleet in a column formation heading out to sea. Of course, this is not a picture from today of them in the firing exercises, but giving a little bit of a look at what the Black Sea Fleet looks like. This is once again showing that the Russians are starting to get quite serious and taking these threats from Turkey seriously, and they are preparing to possibly go to war with Turkey if they were to provide armed escorts to merchant ships heading into the Black Sea and into Odessa or Mykolaiv. This may be the flashpoint of the war so far, with Russian military buildups inside of Belarus and Polish military buildups as well, along with the Turks, who appear to be, once again, reiterating the idea, or going through the statements, that they are going to be providing armed escorts to Ukrainian cargo ships. This may actually be the closest that the Western world has ever gotten to war with the Russians at this point. Because unlike other times where the Russians were threatening war just due to a support we were giving, Western soldiers and really Western militaries weren't going to be involved much in those affairs. It was just a simple transfer of weapons into Ukraine, and there wasn't really a chance of NATO armed forces getting into firefights with the Russian armed forces at that point. But right now, we're seeing two separate instances where here in the next few days or weeks, we may be seeing possible blows happening in between the West and Russia. Of course, once again to reiterate, the Polish-Belarusian border area and also the Black Sea, with the possibility of Turkish armed escorts for Ukrainian merchant ships. And the situation is, of course, very serious, and the Russians are very concerned about the possibility of armed conflict. The West is also very concerned about that as well. But one thing that the Russians aren't that concerned about is looking like there are massive fractures inside of the Russian world. And one of those fractures came from somebody that everyone was wondering why hadn't he gotten the window treatment yet. And it appears that he is getting a window treatment of a kind today. Igor Girkin, the guy responsible for the 2014 Donbass conflict, Russia's right-hand man during that entire ordeal, the man who gave the orders for Malaysia Flight 17 to be shot down with over 130 lives lost, was arrested today by Russian authorities, and we have gotten the news right here. A Moscow court has ruled that Igor Girkin / Strelkov remain in pretrial detention at least until the 18th of September. He has been arrested on extremism charges.
Damn.
Oh, buddy! And also, what's even better is that they had a video of him today in the courtroom, and they gave him the window treatment. He's behind a window in the courtroom. Here he is. Look at him.
They need to put him in a cage.
Man, they're treating him like an animal at the zoo in this thing. When you hear them snapping pictures as he just looks straight forward, not moving at all. Oh, isn't it nice? This is what happens in the Russian world. You're Russia's fanboy one day, and then you're Russia's victim the next. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to see. And so many people have been thinking for such a long time with this guy, when in the world are they going to arrest him? Because he's been one of the most critically outspoken people on the Russian government for months at this point. He has not had a single good thing to say about them. And a lot of people were wondering, why in the world has he not been arrested yet? And I'm guessing maybe because he was hiding in dark, dingy basements. Our basement is well lit, so we're kind of separate from that. But
Hey.
but it's interesting to say the least. And another interesting thing about Girkin is that Girkin actually was warning the Russian government about the Wagner unit before the Wagner unit pulled off the coup on the 22nd of June last month. And he was warning the Russian government. He said they're not pro-Russian. They need to give them arm's length distance. They need to start treating them the way they need to be treated. And now look at him. Now he's been arrested and he's going to be charged by the Russian government, while Prigozhin and the Wagner pretty much run free in Belarus. That's how the Russian justice system works. And so with that, speaking of Russian justice, we have to move into Moscow for a minute, because apparently all of the missing generals that appear to have been purged have actually returned, except for Surovikin. Surovikin, aka Russisky Elmer Fudd, is still missing out there somewhere. Supposedly his family's gotten a letter from him saying that he's in good health and he's fine and everything, but I'm kind of doubting that, considering that nobody has physically seen evidence of this guy even alive at this point for, I would say, weeks on end, maybe even over a month at this point. So who knows where Surovikin is? But he is certainly not in the Russian government's good graces anymore. In fact, I would say that he is the farthest away from being in the Russian government's good graces, considering that he was the inside guy for the Wagner unit in the Russian government. And so, very interesting news to hear, and once again showing that apparently the purge has happened in some way. They're getting Girkin and Surovikin now clearly, but beyond that, nothing really big is happening as far as the purge is going. It appears that the Russians are having to play this a lot lightly than they initially wanted to, as far as getting rid of people who are dissenting against the government and talking terrible things about Putin. Moving on into Ukraine and towards the direction of Zhytomyr, we also saw a very interesting occurrence today. Apparently, the Russians hit a target inside of Zhytomyr, and I believe, if the caption is correct, it is a storage location for cluster munitions, supposedly. At least that's what they're saying. But then again, whenever the Russians make a caption for a video, they are always saying that it's the brand new equipment that they're blowing up. Either it's depleted uranium shells, or a Leopard 2A5, or something along those lines. But here's the clip. We hear Ukrainian air defense is firing, and we can see them hitting the ammo depot.
Jeez, that's an explosion right there.
Yeah, that was a hell of an explosion.
Wow, there's like fireworks going off too around it.
You know, that may actually be cluster munitions. Now seeing the little explosions there, that may be possible. But with that, that's the end of the clip, and it's unfortunate to see that the Ukrainian ammo depot was blown up. Of course, they do have ammunition reserves, which means that this isn't as detrimental to the Ukrainians as it would have been to the Russians, but certainly a large loss of ammo had inside of that ammo depot. We're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news inside of Zhytomyr, and we're now going to be moving on into the direction of our location unknowns. And we've had some fairly interesting ones today, starting off with our first clip of a BTR-80 convoy of the Ukrainian army on the move. And copyright. And we're going to have to mute that, but when you see the BTR-80s moving down this country road, and y'all know what they say about country roads. Country roads, take me home. But anyways, that's the end of the clip, and great to see some Ukrainian forces on the move on top of those BTR-80s. Moving on to our next clip, we also saw some very neat trench art. And I wanted to show this to y'all, because trench art is something that has always existed in every single war. But some of this stuff is taking the cake, like these little shells right here that they've painted up. These are really good.
That is pretty cool. That's artistic. A lot more artistic than I am.
Yeah, way more artistic than I think both of us are. But we got some kind of a little guy over here dressed up in something, unfortunately, I don't know. But we got, it appears to be Poseidon with a Ukrainian trident, and a Ukrainian soldier with what appears to be a rifle, possibly. But a really good trench art, nonetheless, and it's some impressive painting. Moving on into our next little picture, we also got a little Ukrainian soldier guy made out of pieces of stuff found at the front line, standing on a Russian flag and waving a Ukrainian one. Once again, pretty cool stuff. Moving on into our next bit, we also saw a whole bunch of Ukrainian tridents, along with the little shells that we saw that were painted earlier, and all of them appear to have little pieces of armored vehicles or something like that on the tridents, and they're also made out of the gears of most likely tank or APC transmissions. Once again, really cool stuff. Moving on from that and on into the next one, we can once again see the Ukrainian soldiers. This one appears to be a imitation of the Iwo Jima flag raising, but a Ukrainian version of it. And then finally, the last one is just the tridents again. But some incredibly cool trench art, and once again showing the industrious nature and creative nature of Ukrainian soldiers while they live out the boredom of sometimes being in inactive areas of the front line. With that, moving on into our next bit of location unknown news, we also got to hear of some more support that the Germans have given the Ukrainians in this last aid package. Apparently, they have given 10 Leopard 1 tanks, and these have actually arrived in Ukraine at this point. They are the first Leopard 1s to enter the country, and of course, to reiterate a little bit of information about the Leopard 1A5, the Leopard 1A5 is one of the most modern iterations of the Leopard 1 main battle tank series. Initially, the Leopard 1 was introduced into German service in the early 1960s. Since that point forward, it has been considered the first true main battle tank. Of course, scholars kind of discuss what is the first main battle tank in history. Some go with the Centurion, some go with the Leopard, but this is certainly one of the first in the world, and one of the first that starts to emphasize a lot of what we see in Western doctrine, which is speed and maneuverability. The maneuverability and the firepower. The armor isn't really there. There's not a lot of armor on a Leopard 1. There is especially no armor on an AMX-30, which was kind of the going doctrine at the time for tanks. But the modern iterations of the Leopard 1A5, for example, this one right here, these are fairly modern and fairly competent. They can go up against Russia's best. In the Cold War, the Leopard 1A5s were planned to go up against T-72s, and T-72Bs as well. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of what the Western nations, like Germany, plan for these tanks to go up against. So they are capable of going up against these vehicles. They are a little bit older. They're not the best thing in the Western world, but still certainly going to help out the Ukrainians in getting more armor to the front lines. Moving on from that, we also saw that they got some more Zetros trucks. We rarely ever see these. In fact, this is really the first time I've ever seen this thing, and it's pretty weird. It kind of looks like a Unimog and something else combined.
That's pretty cool looking, I gotta say. A Mercedes semi-truck, that's something you don't see very often.
Especially in America. And that's a really cool vehicle. Hopefully, these will be effective in being supply trucks. And I also have to mention that only 16 supply trucks is a somewhat small number, but we don't know what kind of attrition the Ukrainian logistics units are taking, whether they're losing a large amount of supply trucks a day or not, but still 16 trucks is better than no trucks, and hopefully they'll be helping them out in the frontline situation. We also saw that they got 10 of these ground surveillance radars. These are supposed to be able to pick up Russian tanks and APCs well off in the distance and give the Ukrainians an idea of where they are, how many there are of them, and where they are going. And we also heard that they are getting exactly 3,369 155mm artillery shells. I don't know what's up with the exact number of 3,369. Nice. But very interesting to hear an exact number such as that. And it's also, once again, a little bit of a smaller number of artillery rounds, but still not bad. We also heard that they're going to be getting 100,000 first aid kits, which is probably the largest part in bulk of this supply package, is the 100,000 first aid kits and other equipment that will be sent to Ukraine. But it's great to hear that the Germans are continuing their support for the Ukrainians and finally sending over even more main battle tanks such as the Leopard 1A5, and hopefully we'll be seeing that those are quite competent and very capable against Russian armor on the field, and hopefully are also able to support infantry and their advances on the southern front. Moving on from that into our next bit of location unknown news, we also saw a brand new Ukrainian T-72. This is a T-72M that the Ukrainians have upgraded a little bit, and so let's take a look at it. And we can see it rolling into frame right here. fairly nice. And I don't know what these are, but it appears that they've added some kind of slats to the front of the turret. They appear to be rubber slats. They have a cope cage, which is very interesting because it's one of the first Ukrainian tanks in the war we've seen with a cope cage. And it also appears that they put ERA tiles around the rear of the turret, which is somewhat rare. But it seems as though they may have souped up this T-72 a little bit, especially with the large amount of ERA tiles that we see on it. It will probably be able to stand up better to RPG rounds and other AT weapons like that, a lot better than it would have been able to otherwise. And of course, great to see that the Ukrainians are always introducing new frontline equipment to the battlefield, so that way they can continue to try and get a little bit of an upper hand on the Russians. Of course, things like explosive reactive armor, especially Contact 1 like we're seeing on this tank, it has kind of had its day, at least as far as stopping tank rounds. But one thing that it can stop is things such as RPG-7s, which we know the Russians have in somewhat larger abundance compared to really anything else they have, like the RPG-29s, which are their more modern AT weapons. And so this will help to protect the tank against an RPG-7. Beyond that, however, it may not be all too effective. But moving on from that little bit of news and on into our final bit, it is time for us to get into the Russian casualty report over the past 24 hours. And it has been pretty juicy.
Oh, yes, sir. They got one.
Hey, they got one. They got a
Hey!
single Bobcat skid steer. And let's see if we got any memes on that. Let's see here. Oh, with a terrible P. Oh, look, they put ERA on the Bobcat.
I like those little noodle creatures again in the bottom.
Yeah, so
what do
little,
they call those things?
I just call them things. I don't even know what these are supposed to be. I think someone said they're sharks, but I don't believe that.
Somebody had told us the name of these creatures last time, but I can't remember what it was. I'm sure we're going to get flamed for not remembering, but the creatures are notorious for some reason.
I don't even know why, but they are pretty cool to see. And so an amazing meme. And moving on from that, let's see, not really seeing... Oh, Mike will put in a Bobcat. Look, San Diego Zoo has a pretty cool Bobcat exhibit. There's a Bobcat in the zoo. That's pretty cool. I like that one.
That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool, I have to admit. Wow, we were sitting there in silence for like a few seconds, and that appears to be the only two memes we had for the Bobcats. There were more memes for the Bobcats than there were Bobcat losses today, but of course, a single Bobcat skid steer was lost, and that is absolutely amazing. Not only that, we saw that 680 Russian soldiers were lost over the past 24 hours, which is a fairly high number. That is only about 120 short of an entire battalion tactical group's worth of force being knocked out over the past 24 hours of the war. So, of course, an amazing number to see, and letting us know that the Russians are definitely being attrited to a high amount. We also saw that they lost 15 armored personnel carriers as well, along with 11 supply trucks, 4 tanks, 18 artillery pieces. It appears that the counter battery was successful today, but not as successful as the past few weeks. 15 drones, unfortunately no MLRSs, 5 cruise missiles, and a whopping 7 anti-aircraft warfare systems, bringing that total up to 440. And it appears that the Ukrainians are getting pretty good at averaging out the frontline losses day by day. We're not seeing big fluctuations anymore in the day-to-day losses. It appears that they've been able to fine-tune their fighting machine, where they're able to destroy a decent number of armored personnel carriers, tanks, artillery systems, anti-aircraft systems, and infantry a day, which is certainly helping them to once again achieve that frontline advantage that they will be needing here to continue their frontline advances in the south and also in the Donbass. But moving on from those losses, which are absolutely great, we are about to be moving into the frontline news itself, which there is really a massive amount of today. It spans all the way from the most northerly part of the front near Drovchina and all the way down to Vasilivka and even into the Kherson Oblast near Novokakhovka. We also saw a little bit of additional news nowhere else. I had to make sure about that because I was like, did we miss some international news? And we didn't. But before we move on into our first bit of news in Drovchina, of course, the live chat has been going absolutely insane tonight. Many of y'all missed that we did not run a stream last night, and I'm very sorry about that, but many of y'all have been talking about what's been happening yesterday and today a great deal in the live chat. And Matthew, of course, has been paying attention as much as he physically can, and for that,
yes,
he has come up with some really good questions that he's seen in the live chat for all of y'all to answer and for us to see what all of y'all are thinking on some of the same subjects. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so moving into our first set of polls, the first one says Russia begins arresting Girkin and other Putin critics, and the question is Putin trying to reassert his authority? 82% said yes, he is. 5% said unsure. 5% also said maybe, but I can't tell. And 8% said no, Putin is simply tired of them. And I think this is Putin's attempt at trying to reassert his authority. Girkin has been making a lot of statements for a very long time disparaging the Russian government and also Putin himself, and he's flown under the radar, kind of like Prigozhin did for a while, and the Russians never arrested him or tried to take him into custody. Something sparked this right now. I think it's partially because Putin did want to try to show people that he still is in charge and can take people down if he wants to. But also, I think there might have been another reason that we haven't heard yet. Maybe Girkin was planning on saying something or doing something that we aren't aware of. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say this is a pretty unprecedented move, considering that he has survived saying the crap he's been saying for so long at this point. I mean, he's been saying this stuff at least for 6 months. And it's crazy to think that they're going to go and arrest him now, because it's like, if that was unacceptable today, how was it not unacceptable for the last 6 months or so? So I think it may be that Putin is once again trying to show the Russian government is strong and get a grip on the internal situation in Russia, so that way people inside the domestic sphere don't think that the Russian government is weak. Because one thing's clear at this point, very clear, is that the Russian government is quite weak. There's really no way to get around that. Of course, the coup showed that there was no internal forces inside of Russia that were willing to stand up and defend the Russian government. And not only that, it also showed that the Russian government was in a great state of panic during that time as well. And all of that is showing that the Russian government is weak. On top of that, they're getting constantly bullied by the West. They're not really able to stop the West from sending any support they want at this point. We've seen everything except for nuclear weapons right now. And they're trying to find a way to make it look like to the Russian public that there is a chance that the Russian government is strong, and there is a chance that Russia may survive the war. So I think that's why they probably did go and arrest Girkin, is that they're trying to make themselves look strong again and pull a power play, so that way they show the public, if you say anything against the Russian government from this point forward, you will end up in the slammer, or you may end up dead, one or the other. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says, do you believe Putin will gain or lose public support in Russia by arresting Girkin and others? 38% said nothing will change. 31% said Putin will lose support for this. 17% said Putin will gain support, and 14% said unsure. And on this one, I personally think that nothing will change. I have a feeling that the people in Russia know that they really can't speak out, or otherwise they will get arrested and prosecuted. And that's just the way it works in Russia. You don't have freedom of speech there. I don't think it'll change Putin's support whatsoever, because they were already aware of that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I have a feeling that it might end up working, because, the Russian people, we always want to think of the Russian people as being a democratic force. But from what we can tell, every single time a democratic force has ever come around in Russia, they actually deride the person and hate them, like Gorbachev or Tsar Nicholas II. So I would say that the public is probably cheering it on, or they're probably thinking that the guy actually did do something bad, because, for him to be arrested after saying stuff for 6 months, I guess the Russians would have a pretty good argument at this point that, listen, we're not shutting down free speech or anything. We're just, he's an extremist at this point for A, B, and C reason. They may even have come up with trumped up charges on him, so that way they can make it look like it's not what he's been saying, it's what he's possibly been doing behind the scenes. So maybe that's the case. So maybe they will end up gaining a little bit of support and making the Russian government look a little stronger. Because once again, and this is another important point to remember, is that the Russian people aren't armed a lot. So it's not really like it would be easy for the Russian public to rise up against the government and have a fairly good chance. The Russian army would have to join the public for the public to have any chance at all. And that's what happened during the Soviet coup during 1991 that finally led to the Soviet Union's collapse. And that's also what happened during the 1917 October Revolution, is that the public was joined by the army, which actually had the guns for the most part. And so they were able to rise up and actually have a chance against the other part of the armed government. And so it's going to be really hard for the Russians, the Russian public, to rise up even if they wanted to. So this gives a lot of people in the Russian public the ability to go, oh, well, I'm not going to stand up because they're just going to squash me like they did Girkin. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion and what I'm thinking about the situation. And if y'all disagree with me, let me know in the live chat, because there is really any direction it can go. It's really a matter of an opinion at this point as to what the Russian public will be doing. Will they support this? Will they condemn it? What will they do? But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says, today Putin threatened Poland and claimed that Poland's land was a quote-unquote gift from Stalin. And what are your thoughts? 38% said Putin wants to attack Poland. 35% said Putin would never attack. 23% said he might but likely won't. And 4% said unsure. And to me, I think it's becoming very clear at this point that Putin does want to attack Poland, but is he going to attack is a whole other story, because attacking Poland carries a lot of implications with it, including getting into a scrap with the entire NATO alliance, which is what that would entail. But at this point, with the stupid actions that Putin has taken up to now by attacking Ukraine and invading their country, which really didn't make any sense whatsoever on his part, I wouldn't rule anything out. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it's not out of the picture. I would have to agree with you for the most part. I don't think this is out of the picture whatsoever in between the Russians attacking Poland, because these statements that are being made, and also the military buildup on the Polish border, is something we have never seen before over the history of modern Eastern Europe from 1991 to the modern day. And so I would have to say this is something that is quite serious. On top of that, if he does attack Poland, that directly draws in not just the United States to, make this important for American viewers, but this draws in really every single nation in the Western world. It'll draw in the Canadians, the British, the French, the Germans, the Benelux countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Czechoslovakia, well, not Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, I believe Hungary as well, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Greece. Really any country you can think of here in the Western world, they will become a part of that war, also including Norway, Finland, and potentially Sweden by that point. And that is a situation that is pretty large, to say the least. You're going to see the entire Western world, if the Russians try to invade Poland, go to war in a single instant. Probably over the course of 48 hours, you'll see every single country get directly involved in that armed conflict. And considering that the Russians have made stupid decisions throughout the entire war up till this point, it's totally not out of the question that they may possibly make another stupid decision and end up getting involved directly in an armed conflict with Poland and invoking Article 4 and Article 5 for NATO. That is not out of the question whatsoever. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Not to be alarmist or freaking anyone out or anything, but it is a very concerning and serious situation. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and we have one last poll here that's currently running. It says the Pentagon says that Wagner troops in Belarus are actually Russian troops under Putin's control. And what are your thoughts? 55% said they are Russian troops in disguise. 19% said I think it's too early to tell. 14% said unsure. And 12% said they are 100% Wagner troops. And specifically, the Pentagon said that the Wagner troops inside of Belarus are being reintegrated into the Russian military, and Putin is the one calling the shots on these troops, and not Prigozhin. If you watched our short war summary earlier today, I did say that Prigozhin probably still has a good deal of control over Wagner, but it looks like Putin is asserting his authority over those troops, and it could actually be a Russian troop movement in disguise as a Wagner mercenary movement. It's really unclear at this point, but the Pentagon believes that it could be Russian troops. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it is probably Russian troops. We did hear that where the Wagner was going to be going, and it appears that they are going to be ending up in the camp near the area of Sviatoslahorsk, right here on this map, somewhere in that area. And that was the last understood position of Wagner forces that were going to be training the Belarusian army. And now we're starting to hear of large buildups of supposedly Wagner, but really Russian Ministry of Defense soldiers somewhere in the area of the Polish border, or as it should be called, the Polish frontier. That is something that doesn't really line up with the intel and information that we've been getting about the Wagner unit being set up at Sviatoslahorsk. That is a totally different direction than where they would be in real life, and it does indicate that that may possibly be the Russian Ministry of Defense building up forces on the Belarusian border. It may also be a Russian-Belarusian coalition of forces that are building up on that border and starting to cause a large amount of tension. And one thing I do have to say is that a lot of people are probably going, oh, border buildups aren't that big of a deal. We could just, ignore it and move on. But this is the thing. I sat there and had the same mindset before the war in Ukraine began, as that we saw the massive buildup of Russian troops all the way through Belarus and all the way around the borders of Ukraine and Crimea. And I sat there and said at the beginning of the war, oh, that would be stupid. It would be suicidal for the Russians to do something like invade Ukraine. And I don't think they would do that, because that would just be the dumbest thing on earth. And then they went and did it. And so because of that, it lays out a precedent that if the Russians start building up military forces on someone's border, it is not out of the question at all that they may actually end up launching an attack on that country, and that is the whole reason these forces are being built up. So for that reason, I can't rule out that those are Russian Ministry of Defense forces, like the Department of Defense Intelligence is saying, and that they may be possibly looking to invade Poland, maybe even the Baltics as well, in some kind of a joint attack from the northern area of Russia and also the western border of Belarus. And so with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well in my opinion, and also gives you all a little bit of an explanation why I'm taking that seriously. And with that, we are on to the next one. I think we're actually out of polls.
Yes, we are. We are fresh out of polls like usual, so we're moving on to our Super Chat questions. And up first, we have a very generous $40 donation from none other than Duncan VR. And thank you very much, Duncan, for that support. And tonight, I can be very enthusiastic about the animal noises because I am doing slightly better. So, while my voice cracks up right as I said that, Duncan says, "Ba mooba, ba ba." And he puts in the sick faces. He says, "Matthew's sick, ba ba. Please throw up on Mr. Pootler's keyboard, baba. Oink, oink. Oh, man, I'm telling you, baba."
Man, you know,
oh, man.
Honestly, that felt like a shorter message than normal, for real. I'm not going to lie.
It was a little short for Duncan.
It was a little short, but nonetheless, the animal jokes were carried out again. And I got to thank you so much for the support, Duncan, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because folks like you make it possible for us to enjoy Five Guys like we did today. We had Five Guys, and it was really good. And also, you help us to keep the lights on and help us to do this as a full-time job. And I've been saying this a decent bit nowadays, and I mean it absolutely, that we would rather be doing nothing else than this. And I've got to thank y'all all so much for being an incredibly kind and generous community, not just to Ukraine, but to us, and helping us to keep this channel to keep on rolling. And I got to thank you so much once again for the support, Duncan. And also, Matthew is doing a lot better tonight. He was doing really bad yesterday. It was almost like it was the first day of him being sick again yesterday. That's why we took the night off.
Man, I was doing terrible. I'm telling you.
Oh, man, I'm telling you. He was throwing up all over the place. And
I was not doing that.
Well, he wasn't, but you know, he could have been. But still, thank you so much for the support, Duncan, and helping this channel to keep on rolling. I hope that does address that fairly well, and thank you for being an old guard of the Lee Spring Army. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat goes to Jose Diaz, who puts in a $20 donation. Hey! And thank you very much, Jose, for that support. He said, "I have been with brother-in-law and family at Boquerón Beach in Puerto Rico this week. Always thinking and praying for all of our Ukrainians and LSA brothers and sisters. And Slava Ukraine."
And Slava Ukraine. And thank you so much once again for the support, Jose Diaz, our commandant of Puerto Rico. And unfortunately, I don't know where that beach is. What was the name of that beach again?
Is a Boquerón Beach.
And how do you spell that?
Something like Boqueuron.
Boquerón Beach. Let's see here. I think this may be it. This may give us a good idea of where that is. Here it is. This has got to be Nope, that's Tanga Beach. That's not the beach. I think it's somewhere around here though, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I know I'm wrong on this one. But still, thank you so much for the support, Jose Diaz, and helping this channel to keep on running. Really cool to hear that you're having a fun time with family, and it's always important to share time with family, because they're the greatest thing in the world. And I completely understand when people take time off from watching this stream to go and do things with family and friends, because there's nothing else like having a great family or great friends. And so thank you so much once again for coming back, Jose Diaz, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope you had an amazing time with your family at Boquerón Beach. Hopefully we're saying that correctly too, because Jose Diaz was like, Boquerón Beach in the live chat. And I was like, oh man, I know I got that one wrong. But still, thank you so much once again for support, Jose Diaz, our commandant of the Puerto Rican division of the LSA. And thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running and being an old guard of the Lee Spring Army. And so with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the Frontline news.
All right, and the final one of the segment goes to Psyops, also our moderator. And good to see Psyops. He puts in a $10 donation, and he says Girkin found himself in quite the pickle. It's a pretty big deal. He's going to learn in jail the horror of... now, I can't read that one off because that's a little graphic, but he might learn about the horrors outside of jail, actually. The Russians probably have something else in store for him, to be honest.
Yeah, you know, those Russians are those Russians are something. So he might experience that outside of jail, but nonetheless, I do thank you for the support, Sabs, and throwing in an amazing joke, a classy one, as a matter of fact. He's in quite a bit of a pickle, a dill, as a matter of fact. And I'll have to remember that one as we talk about him in the future, because that was a pretty good one, I'm not going to lie. But still, thank you so much for the support, Sabs, and helping this channel to keep on rolling. Of course, welcome back. It's been a while since you've been on, and I know that you've been going through some stuff in the background, and I hope all of that's hopefully sorted itself out, and you're able to be here with us again full-time, because you have been one of the oldest members of the Lee Spring Army. Certainly an old guard by every single metric of the word, and I've got to thank you so much once again for always sticking with us, Sabs, and always being our funny guy in the live chat. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are now going to be moving on into, and let me make sure to get the mouse onto the right page so I'm not moving around the wrong stuff. We are now going to be moving on into the northeastern front line. And there's been a little bit of news in this area. Let me refresh the map real quick to make sure that it has updated. And it appears that it's actually updated to this day. So we're going to be showing the past 48 hours. And so we can see that over the past 48 hours, apparently the Russians have made another advance in the area of Karmanznivka, and it appears that they were able to take another forested tree line area around the Zarabets River, and that was about all the developments there were in this front line. This appears to be a minor offensive by Russian forces, although its aim is completely unknown. There are no major highways in the area of this advance, nor any major infrastructure, so I don't really know what that minor offensive is trying to achieve, because it can't even achieve anything propaganda-wise or strategically. So I don't really know what that's for, but we'll be waiting and seeing if there is a larger plan involved with that. But moving on into our first clip near Drovchina, we saw that artillery hit the Russians hard in this area while I sit there and stutter like Porky Pig. And so, here's the clip. And we got copyrighted music to accompany it. We can see the artillery blast, and it appears that the Russians are scattering. We can now see more artillery hitting inside the tree lines, and effectively hitting Russian positions. We can now see the artillery once again landing in the tree lines, and also landing in a somewhat populated area. That may have been Kuzumivka. And we can now see the artillery hitting ammunition stores in the area, and really anything and everything you can imagine. I think we've seen it hit everything at this point. Armored vehicles, ammunition depots, infantry positions. You name it, they're hitting it. And we also got a strong wind warning right there, because apparently some Russian got so scared from the shelling that he passed wind. See that right there?
Man.
And we can see the artillery still landing pretty accurately. You see them continuing to hit the area, and with that, that's the end of the clip. And uh-oh, is that a new unit badge? And are those AKs or are they ARs, Matthew?
They look like ARs to me, with like that SOP mod stock on it.
Looks like ARs to me. I wonder what happened to the old Soviet invincibility of the AK. They keep on disappearing from everything, and the Ukrainians are starting to like the ARs more and more. And I mean, you can't really blame them, because although AK-74s, in my experience, actually aren't that bad, they're really good. The ARs are just an unbeatable platform for a myriad of reasons, in all honesty, if we're, being frank here. The AK isn't that bad of a gun. One of the first ones I got, the Century Arms AK-47, now that one was one I wasn't really that happy with, I'm not going to lie. That one made AK seem as bad as they really were. But once I actually started to get some legitimate AK-74s, they are a lot better than the original AK I got. Still, I think that the AR beats them, just due to its usability, the way it's produced, and the craftsmanship that goes into an AR platform versus an AK. But moving on from that little clip, which is great to see the Ukrainians slamming the Russians pretty hard like that, we're now going to be moving on down into the area of Kuzumivka, where we saw that 2 T-80 main battle tanks were destroyed by Ukrainian forces. We hear the copyrighted music, of course, blaring up, and we can see the first T-80 being hit right here. We can now see them dropping another bomblet, this one once again exploding onto the tank. And we can now see another T-80, and bloop, and there we have it, another explosion. This one appears to have actually been ammo-racked immediately. We can now see another bomblet being dropped onto it. That one appears to have not caused that much damage initially. We can now see another bomblet hitting the engine bay of a T-80. And with that, that's the end of the clip, but once again showing the amazing work of the drone forces of Ukraine and showing the kind of damage that they were able to conduct. With just a few $1,000s and a couple of bomblets, they were able to inflict millions of dollars of damage onto the Russian army. And you always have to remember, every single time, whenever you watch those drone videos, what is impressive about them is that those drones truly are just a few $1,000s a pop, and the bomblets they're carrying cost maybe tens of dollars to make, not much. And with those bomblets and with those drones, which, you know, the bomblets and the drones, maybe the combined amounts, maybe $2,250,000, they are able to destroy $2.5 million tanks one after the other, minute after minute. As long as they don't run out of bomblets, that little $2,000 drone can inflict millions of dollars of damage on the Russian army. And that kind of cost effectiveness of a drone is what helps the Ukrainians to get an upper hand advantage on the Russians in the long war, because long wars are fought not through the ability to deal strategic blows on the battlefield. It is largely fought through economics, spending, and war industry abilities, and also foreign support. And that's one thing the Ukrainians are winning in spades at the moment. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into the area of Zalaman, where we saw a Russian ammo depot get hit today. And we can see the open-air ammo depot right down there. We can see the drone is actually measuring the range to the target. And we can now see the artillery shell hitting the ammo and causing a little bit of a detonation. And it is quite warm. And oh, he just pulled out the camera. He said, Mom, cap that, clip it. And we see them filming it with their handheld camera as we watch little bits and pieces of the ammo dump go flying all over the place. A really nice scene, and once again showing that the Russians are losing ammunition at a pretty fast pace.
He said, look there.
Explosion.
He said, look. Firebomb.
He said, look, Bliet, this is blowing up. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little ammo depot that just got blown up. Absolutely amazing to see. And we're now going to be moving down into the direction of Kremenna. The Russians are still attempting a micro-offensive in the direction of Kremenna, and it appears that their goal for this offensive is recapturing the village of Torske, which they originally captured somewhere around March of last year, and then lost Torske around September of last year, so around the same time that they're trying to retake it this year. And it appears that the Ukrainians are starting to move more forces into this area to try and counter these Russian advances. And we can see in this clip, Ukrainian forces preparing to move forward in the area around Kremenna. Sadly, we can't play the audio because it is copyrighted, but we got a good look at the Ukrainian soldiers here that will be involved in the fighting. And we can see that they have a little MRAP back there. It appears to be a Kirpi armored car from Turkey, and we can also see another one. Very nice! And so with that, that's the end of that clip, and hopefully those soldiers are able to move up to the front lines and help defend this area and ensure that we once again see over the next 24 hours that the Russians were not able to make a single advance in that area. Moving on out of that direction and on down into Bakhmut, the past 48 hours have been something because I haven't even been able to see them before the stream went live. So, let's see what we've got. So, over the past 24 hours, we have seen a large Ukrainian advance in the northern area, moving downwards towards Kremove and into Bakhmut itself, and it appears that the Ukrainians are now trying to claim the entirety of the high ground and have undisputable control, especially over the ridge lines here, where it overlooks the city of Bakhmut, and it gives them a large area to shoot into and, of course, inflict damage on the Russian forces. We also saw in the southern area, well, actually, we saw about right here, it seems as though that the Ukrainians were able to take a large area of ground in this forested area, leading right up to the city of Bakhmut itself. And so once again, another sizable movement by the Ukrainian forces, and once again showing that their offensive actions in Bakhmut are starting to prove to have some fairly positive results. And so moving on into our northern flank clip, we saw the 30th Brigade up here fighting against the Russians. And we're going to have to mute that because that's copyrighted, of course. We see Russian forces right there, trying to lob a grenade at the Ukrainians. We now see them getting down and hiding as something blows up right in front of his trench. It appears to have not hit him, but the second hit was a little bit closer. And now we're waiting for that third hit, and that one appears to have been somewhat effective. We can now see the Ukrainians rolling up like it's some kind of a battlefield game, just rolling up at full speed on the back of a BMP. And we now see the BMP greasing the tree line as it gets close enough to let the infantry dismount. We now see the infantry getting involved in trench fighting with the Russians, and we now see the Russians retreating from the area as they're now being hunted down by the Ukrainian forces. And it appears they're also being hunted down by the artillery simultaneously. Nonetheless, that doesn't deter them. They are going to get the hell out of there. And we see some Russians taking naps, and it appears that everything went well for the Ukrainians, and they were able to take another tree line in the area of Zelensky. Moving on from there and down into the city of Bakhmut, we saw some footage from the 93rd Brigade, also showing them directly bombarding the city itself. Of course, the 93rd is famous at this point, known as the Fighting 93rd, and we can see them once again living up to that name with this artillery barrage aimed at Russian forces inside of these buildings. I'm not really sure if that was a barrage of M777s or other similar artillery pieces, or whether it was a barrage of MLRSs, but they did blanket a large area of the city of Bakhmut, and hopefully were able to inflict some damage on the Russian forces, because we didn't really see the Russian forces in the film. They may have been inside of the buildings. Moving on from that and a little bit behind the lines, we also got to see the story of an M777 on the front line. And of course, this video was made by none other than the amazing folks at United 24. And so, I'm going to let this clip play, and I'm also going to get some water because my throat is bone dry. And without further ado, here's the clip.
Artillery and modern air reconnaissance have become this war's power couple. This tandem causes the most damage to both enemy machinery and personnel. Ukraine relies heavily on modern howitzers like M37s to suppress the enemy and provide cover for its own troops. So today we are working with the 45th Brigade. This is the artillery unit who are working with the M37s. They are covering the infantry units. We're advancing in the direction of Klishkiivka, the nearest village to the Bakhmut. Since the summer of 2022, Bakhmut has been one of the hottest spots of the front line. The Ukrainian army is fighting for the strategically important heights around the city, such as Klishkiivka, Berkhivka and Khromove. During the last months, this unit has been working tirelessly, pushing themselves and their M37s to the limit.
200 to 250. That's a whole day of work. If you maintain the gun, it does not fail. Each howitzer has fired tens of thousands of rounds.
As we are speaking to the commander, new ammo arrives. The 45th Artillery Brigade is relatively new and consists mostly of volunteers and mobilized men.
Sold spare parts for cars. No one is born for war. I'm winding up fuses because without them, the shells won't explode. 107s, fragmentation, or you can switch to high explosive. We use them for infantry.
After fleeing the occupied city of Kherson, Serhiy volunteered to serve in one of the airborne assault brigades. During the offensive on Soledar, he got injured and then redeployed to this artillery unit.
Compared to the trenches on the line of contact, this is a resort. But you still know your comrades are dying there every day.
You know something interesting, not to make the video seem a little bit lighter than it is, but isn't it funny the way this guy is talking and dealing with those artillery shells? It almost seems like he's like cleaning corn at a restaurant or something, you know, shucking it and everything.
Yeah, almost.
Kind of. But with that.
We enter the angle to understand how high to raise the barrel. We have a bubble meter that we use to set the level, and we have an angle meter. We enter the angle, and through the sight, we aim at the collimator and rotate the gun accordingly.
Despite its precision and great range, the M37 is quite a large towed howitzer, which makes it easy to spot by Russian drones.
Russian airborne assault troops are stationed over there, and they are quite well trained. If they open fire on us, it is with large caliber systems, or MLRS. We use them to protect the gun from Russian suicide drones. It's quite effective. Some guns were not damaged at all, some had minimal damage.
The first howitzers to arrive in Ukraine were used to liberate the Kharkiv and Kherson regions. They also played an important role in the Vuhledar direction, where Russia tried to advance with large forces this winter, but suffered significant losses. Here near Vuhledar, we meet the 55th Artillery Brigade, who were among the first ones to receive the M37s.
In January and February, this direction was brutal. At that time, the guns were brought from other directions to reinforce us. We had to move constantly. And it was winter, cold and swampy. The first few days were very hard, and then we just got used to the rhythm. Then, as you know, we stopped them, pushed them back, burned a lot of equipment, and the situation stabilized.
At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Nazar was abroad. However, he made his way back to Ukraine to join his brigade where he served in 2016.
The war is a lot different now than it was in 2016. Back then, we could go out, shoot, and then go back to shoot again in a month. Now the war is 24/7.
Now this direction is relatively calm, as most Russian units are deployed elsewhere. Still, the artillerymen have to be fully alert, ready to crush any attempts to assault Ukrainian frontiers.
We now see them blowing the piece again. And firing.
As we can see, it's vital for the crew to hide the gun directly after they fire it, because there are too many UAVs from the enemy side that will be searching for this exact gun within the seconds. Oleg joined the 55th in 2019. Back then he was working mostly with the Soviet-made Sabis. In July 2022 he switched to the M37s.
5 days. We were trained by American experts. They actually didn't believe we'd do it. But we showed them what we can do on the Mistas. In terms of targeting, everything is the same, except for a couple of nuances. The Mistar was large, fired short range, and constantly leaked all over the place. This gun is more modern and reliable. It is more complicated, but we've gotten used to it.
And that's the end of the clip from United 24, but a very interesting video explaining a decent amount of detail and information about the M777 units that are operating in the vicinity of Bakhmut at this moment. And of course, may have been the actual guns that we just saw firing on Bakhmut in the clip right before that. They are impressive guns, of course, and great to know that the United States provided them. So that way they are able to continue the massive amount of firepower that has been levied against the Russians so far and has kept them at bay and has also inflicted a large amount of casualties. Moving on from that clip and on into the direction of Klishkivka, we have seen that one advance somewhere in this area here over the past 24 to 48 hours or so, but the one clip we had appears to have come from the tree line here just south of Klishkivka, where we saw that the Ukrainians were able to take some more prisoners. The exchange fund grows. And we can see the two prisoners lying face down here while the Ukrainians get ready to process them and then bring them back to their APC. But with that, that's the end of that clip, and of course, absolutely great to see that the Ukrainians were able to capture a couple of more Russian prisoners. We're now going to be moving on from the Bakhmut area and a little bit further on down the line into Donetsk, where over the past 48 hours, we have seen, and I'll be showing y'all here, we have been seeing that the Russians have actually made 1 or 2 advances in the Donetsk region. One of them was here in the direction of Vesely, where it appears that they have taken half of the village once more and have pushed the Ukrainians back a small amount, and further down into the direction of Marinka, where we saw the Russians reclaim one small tree line on the end of a field. Beyond that, it appears that the front lines are largely inactive at this moment, but it does seem that the Russians are trying to regain some kind of an initiative at this point. Moving on into our first clip, though, near Kamyanka, we saw some Ukrainian forces in this direction, stopping a Russian assault dead in its tracks. We now see them firing. We can see this guy moving back into a destroyed building. We hear a Ukrainian soldier yelling orders. And we now see this guy, it appears that he's preparing some kind of an AT weapon to fire at the infantry. We now see him aiming it out the window and firing. We now see him moving back away from the door, throwing away the RPG, and now picking up his AK again. We now see him... Wait, did he just throw a grenade? Hang on, I gotta go watch that again. Yeah, he did. I thought there were other Ukrainians right out there.
Maybe there were.
I don't know. Hopefully there wasn't. We now see him firing back out of the doorway again with his AK. We now see him lobbing another grenade right over the top of this roof. as the firefight continues on. It appears that he has left his AK down there on the floor for a moment, as he's now getting another RPG ready. He's lining it up, and we didn't see it fire at this point. We now see him fiddling with something. It is another grenade that he's thrown out there. And he's now firing over the side of his building. It appears that they may actually be getting surrounded at this moment by this Russian assault. And I'm starting to hear music play there, so I'm going to have to mute that. But we can see him reloading the AK. Very nice Bakelites, by the way. And we now see him once again firing over the top of his building at what may be Russian infantry just a few yards away. We now see him looking around and continuing to fire in that direction. And we now see him fiddling with the AK again, and once again moving back over to the other side of the building where he has a friend. He's firing past his friend at the moment, and once again back out into the same direction he was firing at the beginning of the video. We now see the footage has been clipped, and it's moved forward a little bit in time, and they're still looking out and trying to find these Russian soldiers. We see him poking out of the doorway a little bit more and getting on out of the building as he continues to fire at the building about 20 to 30 yards away. That may be where most Russian infantrymen are at this point. We now see that he set his AK down. It appears that he is attempting to reload it. He's whipped out another Bakelite. He is reloading it. And he is continuing to fire once again. We can now see this Ukrainian soldier running to the next destroyed building. It appears that this may actually be in the village. Oh, was that a grenade? I think that was a grenade right there.
Looked like one.
I don't know what kind of grenade that was. It looks like a German potato masher. But we can see them continuing to fire into that direction. We can see something else fly overhead towards the left. Couldn't tell if that was a grenade or not. We can see an explosion in front of them from something. Maybe it's artillery that was just called in. We see the smoke still rising from that explosion as the Ukrainians hang low for a minute, lobbing another grenade, and it appears that they're going to be using that grenade to give them a little bit of a moment to break from contact. But I can't really tell because it looks like they're not breaking from contact just yet. They're still staying in the same location, and we see another Ukrainian soldier joining them from the front left. We now see this guy firing over his friend here and towards the Russian position once more. And we now see that guy getting up and moving out as well, and it appears that the cameraman is the last guy left behind. We can see his AK here smoking, the barrel smoking, showing how much firing he's done over this battle. And we now see him getting up and running as well, as they begin to fall back from the Russians, as it appears that the Russians were starting to overrun that position. So they're going to fall back to try and find a more effective defensive position. But showing some of the fighting that was going on in the Avdiivka direction today, around the village, possibly of Vesely. Moving on past Avdiivka and behind the lines a little bit towards the direction of Karlivka, we saw that a U.S. veteran has been helping out with medical training in this area. According to the caption on the first clip, my TACT med trainings are not done in climate-controlled classrooms in big cities. They are done in the Donbass, and they are done with soldiers who will use that training sometimes the very next day. And moving through the pictures here, we can see a lot of detailed training going on in the Donbass area for Ukrainian soldiers to get a better idea of first aid and how to help out their fellow wounded soldiers. This picture right here appears to be of a soldier laying down on a mat as they are receiving first aid training. In the next picture, we can once again see them simulating some kind of a wound, so that way these soldiers can learn how to deal with that wound. And we can see another picture of that same process, and we can see the soldiers all lying around the mat as they learn how to do first aid. Pretty impressive sight to see, And absolutely great to know that the Ukrainians are constantly being trained and improved, even in their downtime behind the lines, so that way that when they return to the lines, they are just a little bit more effective than they were last time. And so we're now going to be moving on out of the Donetsk region and on into the southern front. And over the past 48 hours in this area, we have seen that the Ukrainians, according to Deep State UA, have been able to make another advance near Robotne. On our map, we show that they have taken Robotne, because according to the live UA map, they have, so it appears that Deep State is still playing that a little bit cautious, not showing that yet. And also in the direction of Staromayorsk here, over the past 48 hours, it appears that there was a small retreat by Russian forces in this one block. Honestly, it looks like they maybe gave up 2 houses worth of area, so not really that big of a movement, but still the 2 largest movements that we could see on the front line over the past 48 hours. Moving on into the direction of Volodar, we saw the Ukrainians firing at Russian targets with a D-30 howitzer. We're going to be muting that because copyright is scary. We can see them loading the D-30 here. You see them getting ready to fire and firing. And there goes the shell. And now they go through the reloading process again. Hopefully that shell was accurate. Moving on from that little clip in that direction and a little bit further down the lines towards Kilochove, we saw a zoo park anti-battery system, or counter-battery system, being destroyed by Ukrainian artillery fire. Apparently it wasn't able to pick this one up. Hey, Vadim, do you see that artillery shell coming right up? And then they're gone.
Damn, that was a lot of explosive power behind that shell.
Yeah, and I think that counter-battery radar wasn't good enough to pick up that artillery shell, apparently. So not really that effective of a counter-battery system. Moving on from that, and out of that area, which is the only clip we got from the Staromayorsk-Staromanivka area today, we're now going to be moving on into the area of Chervone, where we saw the Ukrainians hitting a Russian trench with an FPV drone. And we're going to be muting that for copyright reasons, but we can see the drone flying on in and directly hitting a Russian outpost that's got some guys in it. So we know that that caused a little bit of damage. And with that, that's the end of that clip, but hey, always love to see it, don't we? And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from BUILDUP and down on into an area where we have been seeing a little bit more action on video footage than anywhere else in the southern front, and that is once again around the direction of Robotne. Robotne appears to be one of the most active parts of the southern front right now, and it is one of the areas that has the most promise. If the Ukrainians are able to push down the direction of Robotne and take Novobrivka and Solodka Baltka, they will largely have a free run to make it all the way to Tokmak without the Russians having any defensive positions to work with beyond that point. And so moving on into the area of Pavlivske, we saw that a Smerch was destroyed today by Ukrainian fire. I believe the Smerch is about right there. Nope, it was actually down here. And we see the artillery shell land directly on top of the Smerch, and the Smerch immediately goes up in flames. Another shell lands nearby, and we can see the Smerch having some firing issues. It appears the ammunition was hit and began to cook off. And once again, Smerches are pretty on up there at this point for Russian artillery systems, considering that they are one of the largest MLRSs that they use outside of the TOS-1 thermobaric system. This is a very significant loss for the Russian artillery, especially in the heavy category, and something that they may not recover from for a pretty good while. Moving on from that, however, and into the front line in Robotne, we did see some fighting in the Robotne direction, which gives us a pretty good idea of what it's looking like for a soldier in that area. We can see a M2 Bradley moving around behind the trench as they capture Russian soldiers right here. And it does appear that as they're capturing Russian soldiers and taking trench lines, they are starting to make progress. With that, that's the end of that clip, and moving on into our next one, we also saw more captured Russians. It appears that the Ukrainians had a pretty fun time today in the Robotne direction and were able to capture a large amount of Russian soldiers.
Нашим деткам скажіть, пожалуйста, що ви хочете сказати? А? Давайте. Ну кажи. Пацани.
Very awkward conversation, first off. This guy's like, so, you play tennis? And they're like, That's like the whole conversation.
Я жду, кажіть.
We see the Russian prisoners just kind of looking around awkwardly.
Ну хоч так кратко скажіть. Не хочете поізвінятися над ними? Для них? Ребят,
A tough crowd.
а?
A very tough crowd. They're not really a responsive one.
Всего лиш. Один тільки ізвіняється, да?
You know, they don't really talk much, these guys. I think they might be mute.
Ви вмієте це робити.
But with that, that's the end of the clip, and of course they didn't really talk a lot, but another 3 Russian prisoners were captured. Actions speak louder than words, after all, and so it's great to see that another 3 of them were captured. Moving on into the direction of Piatsky-Katsky, we also saw a Ukrainian BTR-80 moving forward in this direction. Now we're going to be muting that for copyright reasons, but this was a very interesting BTR-80 as it appears to be the command version of the BTR. So really cool to see that because we have never seen one of these on film so far in the entire war. But really cool to see one right now. And so with that, that's the end of the clip right there. But of course, absolutely great to see that they were able to use that command BTR-80 in the area. Very rare vehicle, and hopefully that'll be helping to coordinate Ukrainian forces and help them to continue to push the Russians back towards Vasilivka, directly along the once shoreline of the Novogorkovka Reservoir. Moving on out of the southern front, where we have seen a decent amount of videos, but not really that much frontline movement, we're now going to be moving on down into the direction of Novogorkovka, where we saw a Ukrainian FPV drone clearing out some Russian forces in pretty fantastic flying fashion. We can see it flying down the length of the now drained reservoir, and we can see some Russian forces running for cover there. But alas, that won't help them much, as the drone is about to fly right into the opening and get them. And here it comes. And we can see it going right for the door. And we once again see the Russians running into the dugout. And the drone hitting directly onto the doorway. Very unfortunate for them. We can now see the Lada pulling up.
Oh no, the white one.
Vadim, whip out the Lada. That's when you know you got someone wounded or something worse. And so now we can see
that's what they gave out for gifts, you know, like to the families of the deceased soldiers.
Man, those are handed out to gifts to the wounded soldiers on the front. Now they're like, get yourself out of here. Here's the white Lada Amazon Prime delivery bullet. But still, very nice to see that they were able to hit a Russian outpost today in that area. And really quickly, before I start wrapping up this Novogorkovka, Kherson, Dnipro area, we were not able to cover today any of yesterday's news. I actually did go through all the effort last night to find all of yesterday's news and lay it out on the map, but due to Matthew getting sick, we ended up scrubbing the show right after I got done doing all of the preliminary work for the live show. So it is all on the map. If y'all want to see all of the news from yesterday, you can click on the link in the description below, and you can see every single thing that happened today and yesterday that we were able to get in video and picture evidence, and also some of the massive news headlines like we got from the Belarusian border today, and all of the major news headlines that happened in the Koreas yesterday. But with that, we're now going to be moving north into Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on the 513th day of the war. And so without further ado, here is the speech. Speech! And let me see.
Dear Ukrainian.
Ah, track 2.
Oh, dear.
Track 2.
Дорогі українці, українки, ще 2 дітей сьогодні вбила Росія. Удар російської артилерії по селищу Дружба, турецька громада Донецької області, загинули дівчинка 2007 року народження і хлопчик 2013. Чернігівська область, селище Гончарівське, влучання ракети, 2 жінки вбиті. Триває розбір завалів, пошкодження будинок, культури, школа, житлові будинки. Мої співчуття рідним та близьким загиблих. Сьогодні ж російські ракети і дрони знов били по Одесі, по нашим південним районам. Загалом від початку тижня лише на території Одеської області від російського терору постраждало більше 20 людей, серед них 2 дітей. Лише абсолютне зло може завдавати таких ударів. Буде відповідь. Окрім цього, буде ще більше консолідації світу для захисту і для спільних дій, ще більше енергії заради перемоги, ще більше прагнення справедливості, справедливого покарання Росії за всі злочини цієї війни. І таке покарання буде. Провів засідання Ставки тривали, детально розібрали питання захисту наших міст і громад, наших портів від російських ударів. Якщо хтось там в Росії сподівається, нібито вони зможуть зробити Чорне море простором свавілля і тероризму, то у них це не вийде. Знаємо, як захиститись, бачимо в світі готовність працювати разом і надалі і більш активно, щоб дати спокій цьому регіону. Сьогодні ввечері планую провести перемовини з президентом Туреччини Ердоганом. Чорноморський регіон, продовольча безпека, інші важливі теми. Як і завжди на ставці були детальні доповіді наших військових, розвідок, прикордонників щодо наявної ситуації на передовій. Не лише на ключових напрямках активних дій, але й загалом по кордону, по ймовірному розвитку ситуації. Забезпечення боєприпасами – тема постійної уваги, звичайно, і наше виробництво снарядів та дронів, а не тільки постачання від партнерів. Щотижня фіксуємо більші результати зростання наших можливостей. Провів сьогодні і ґрунтовну нараду щодо одного із найважливіших компонентів державної політики України – політики героїв. Політики щодо наших воїнів, щодо ветеранів. Україна не лише переможе в цій війні, але й виграє таке життя, яке буде гідним героїв, які за нього борються. І це дуже важливо, щоб наш устрій, державний, суспільний, економічний, культурний, був саме таким, про який можна буде сказати, що він дійсно заснований на повазі. На повазі до України та кожного і кожної, хто спрямував своє життя, свою хоробрість, свою силу заради того, щоб Україна вистояла проти зла і перемогла російський терор. Я вдячний усім, хто вже почав розробляти разом з нами деталі української трансформації після цієї війни. І ще одне, я дякую нашим воїнам, кожному і кожній, хто захищає українське небо по всій країні, повітряним силам, усім нашим льотчикам і зенітникам, мобільним вогневим бригадам, кожному підрозділу ППО, усіх родів та видів військ. Дякую вам. Бахмутський напрямок, 5-та окрема штурмова бригада, 24-та окрема механізована бригада, 28-та окрема механізована бригада. Дякую вам, воїни, за вашу відвагу та уміння бити по ворогу так, щоб навіть ворог, якщо виживе, розумів, що Україна завжди буде вільною. 128-ма окрема гірсько-штурмова, Закарпатська бригада, морпіхи 35-ї, 36-ї окремих бригад, артилеристи 55-ї бригади, 79-та окрема бригада ДШВ та 110-та окрема механізована бригада. Дякую вам, воїни, за вашу влучність, за вашу здатність повертати Україні своє. Слава вам усім, воїни, слава кожному і кожній, хто б'ється заради нашої держави і людей. Дякую всім в світі, хто нам допомагає. Слава Україні!
And
Slava.
And Slava Ukraini. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky. But that is the beginning of something else. Because I have to admit, the live chat has been going really fast tonight. I think Matthew can attest to that.
Yes, indeed.
And a lot of y'all have, once again, been saying a whole bunch of interesting stuff in the live chat about some of the top news that many of y'all have been hearing before the stream ever went live. And Matthew has been putting out questions to all of y'all about some of the things we've seen the most in the live chat and asking y'all what y'all think on it. And a lot of y'all have put in some very interesting inputs and opinions. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so jumping right back into our poll segment, our first one says, after Russia warns Turkey, Erdogan says he won't hesitate to stop Russia from blocking Ukrainian grain ships. And what are your thoughts? 41% said Erdogan will step up. 40% said Turkey is sketchy, don't rely on it. 11% said Erdogan is bluffing Russia, and 8% said unsure. And on this one, I would have to be with the 40%. I think Turkey is honestly kind of sketchy, and I wouldn't rely on them actually stepping up and helping out the Ukrainian grain ships get to their port and safely through the Black Sea. I think that right now it sounds like good words by Turkey, and maybe they might step up, but I'm not very optimistic about it because that might involve a direct confrontation with Russia, and I'm not sure if Turkey is ready for that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to largely agree with you there. I don't know if Turkey is ready. to escalate the conflict into an open war with NATO. And also, I believe that the United States may not be ready for them to do something like that, which will put a lot of diplomatic pressure on the Turks, considering that they get a decent amount of support from the United States militarily. They buy a lot of weapons from the United States. They have F-16s. They have, I believe, M60 main battle tanks. They have a decent amount of stuff that the United States has provided them. And so they don't really want to make the United States angry and go against their wishes, and also go against the wishes of the entire alliance, because that may end up being very detrimental for them as far as their longevity. So I think that we should kind of consider the Turkish threat to be a thing, nothing really positive or negative. I think it's a good thing that the Turks are saying something like that and showing that they may have a spine, but at the same time, I wouldn't really expect them to have a spine, because the implications of them having one are pretty severe, especially if they go through with what they're saying and then the Russians respond in turn, and then it becomes a shooting war in the Black Sea. So I would have to say, I don't think they're going to follow through on that, but it is good to hear them say it nonetheless. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says Russia has threatened to bomb the German Rheinmetall weapons plant if built in Ukraine. And what are your thoughts? 61% said Russia would follow through on it. 19% said Russia is bluffing and they won't do it. 13% said it seems unlikely to me, and 7% said unsure. And on this one, I have to admit that even though I fully support Ukraine, I do find it a little odd that the Rheinmetall company would want to build a plant right in the middle of a war zone, because I think it's pretty obvious that Russia would try to target that plant, and it would be a target that Russia would try to take out. So I personally think that Russia would try to follow through on it, and the plant would probably be damaged, if not destroyed completely. So, you know, that is what it is. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it's a fairly idle threat, because if they try and fire into Poland, you know what's in Poland, Matthew?
Oh, no, they're saying to build it inside of Ukraine.
Oh, wait,
the Rheinmetall plant.
I thought there was also a Rheinmetall plant being built in Poland right now, or am I thinking of a different company?
I think you might be thinking about a different one, but Rheinmetall said they wanted to build a plant to build weapons right in the middle of Ukraine.
Okay, sorry, I was thinking about some factory that was being built in Poland that I think we were talking about last week, and talking about how there was an initiative to build more factories there, for example, more Rheinmetall factories. But this one is in Ukraine, and we also have heard about that one as well. I think that was about 2 weeks ago. This one is a little different, because it can become a target for Russian fire. Now, I was going to say about the Polish-built ones, if they were threatening fire into Poland, the U.S. military's there, so they can, of course, intercept those missiles with the Patriots, and everything will be honky-dory. But Ukraine is another story, because they don't have enough Patriot air defense systems, and they don't really have enough air defense systems to successfully stop every single missile that enters Ukrainian airspace. As a matter of fact, they were actually saying that in Odessa, the reason why Odessa was hit so many times that night is because of an Oryx missile that was fired, and apparently the Ukrainians don't have the ability in the Odessa region to shoot down Oryx missiles yet. So that once again opens up the possibility that other parts of western Ukraine, where this factory is going to be, may be susceptible to Russian missile fire if a factory was to be built there. And they may actually follow through with that, especially considering it's in Ukraine and it is a war. That would be a legitimate target of the war. It is a strategic target, a factory that produces military vehicles. So it's not out of the question whatsoever that the Russians would try and follow through on that threat. And hopefully the Rheinmetall factory can either shield the location of the factory incredibly well, or hopefully Western countries are able to provide enough support to the Ukrainian military that they are able to set up effective air defenses in that area and ensure that the factory doesn't get blown up. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well now that I heard the poll correctly. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says, U.S. intel says there is no doubt that Russia has moved nukes into Belarus, and is this a preemptive act by Russia? 60% said yes, Russia is fortifying Belarus. 27% said no, Russia is just posturing and it's a bluff. 7% said it seems like it, but unsure, and 6% said unsure. And I have to say, now that U.S. intel has confirmed that the nukes are most likely definitely inside of Belarus, And now we're learning that the troops that we believed were Wagner fighters might actually be under the control of Putin, and they're actually Russian MOD troops. That definitely does not have a good look to it. By placing nukes in Belarus, what Putin's plan might be is so that if Wagner decides to attack Ukraine from that country, which is actually Russian MOD troops, that nobody's going to bother trying to mess with Belarus because then they have nukes already in their possession. So it could have been a preemptive act, but it's a little too early to tell. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would also have to largely agree with that. It most likely was some kind of an attempt at a preemptive act by the Russians, but of course it is a little too early to tell what the real intent was for them are, because a long time ago, about a month ago, we thought that they may have possibly been nukes moved to Belarus, so that way Putin could flee there, and then he could be protected by Belarus, which would then have nuclear arms to back themselves up with. But that didn't turn out to be the case, so who knows what the nukes are really there for, but that may be one of the reasons. It may be some kind of a fallback option. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one says, Zelensky stated today that Ukraine must neutralize the Crimean Bridge, and why hasn't it been done yet? It looks like 51% said Ukraine doesn't have the weapons, 20% said the West is saying no to Ukraine, 19% said unsure, and 10% said Ukraine isn't ready for Russia's response. And on this one, I'm going to have to say unsure, actually. I'm not really sure why Ukraine hasn't made a second attack on the bridge. They were very capable of making the first attack with the drone boats or some type of drone boat, which blew up that large section of the bridge and left only one lane passable after the Russians decided to put some asphalt over the massive gap in the bridge. But I'm not really sure why they haven't attacked it a second time. But Enforcer, what say you?
What say me? I say, I don't know why they haven't hit it. Everyone's kind of been talking about that, and everyone's always wondering, and I could hear it in your voice, Matthew. I knew you were about to cough, and I was like, you did it. But let's see, one thing that everyone's talking about is why in the world have they not hit the bridge again? They obviously have the ability to attack the bridge successfully, but they never really follow through with completely destroying both bridges. They always attack the road bridge and never the railroad bridge. I would have to be completely honest with everyone. I have absolutely no idea why that's the case. It seems as though maybe they're scared of the Russians freaking out if the railroad bridge is completely destroyed as well. I don't really know, but nonetheless, they haven't attacked it again, and we don't really have a reason as to why. But with that, I hope that does address that the best we can. There's not really enough information to give us an idea of why they're doing that, but with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and with that being said, we are fresh out of polls once again. So we're moving back into our Super Chat questions, and up first, we have a very generous $50 donation from none other than BC Skyman, a longtime channel viewer, and thank you very much, BC, for that very consistent support, as always, and helping to keep us running. He says, chat question, please, and get well, Matt, and Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much for the mass amount of support, BC Skyman, and helping this channel to keep on rolling, because folks like you make this thing possible. If it wasn't for folks like you who supported this channel and through ever since the beginning and helped it to keep on rolling, we wouldn't have been able to do this as a job. And we are incredibly lucky that folks support us like y'all that help us to be able to make this our job, our full-time job. I work at this 60 hours a week. Matthew works at this about 40 hours a week, and it has become everything we do. And thanks to y'all support, we're able to keep on doing it. And so thank you so much for wishing Matthew well. He's doing much better now, guaranteed. He's coughing a little bit now, but he was doing great today. He was actually normal acting for once instead of acting like he had the plague. And so I know that he's feeling better for sure. And I got to thank you so much once again for wishing him the best, because he's certainly gotten better. And with that, we'll be making sure to grab that live chat. What do we got, Matthew?
And the live chat question goes to Austin H. He says, when Ukraine receives the Abrams, do you think they will use them defensive to get used to them, or just rush the trenches with little experience?
They may... that's a good question. I think that they may use them offensively for the first time, because we saw that the Leopard 2s were introduced to the line, and they never got used in any cautious ways. They were used in purely offensive means, trying to push forward and trying to get Bradley columns through minefields and other things like that. So I would have to say they're probably going to end up being used offensively the first time they ever hit the lines. That would be my best guess at the situation. But who's to say? They may actually end up using them defensively, depending on the situation at that point in the war. But I'm starting to lean more towards they will probably just be used defensively from the start. On top of that, it's not really like Ukrainian crews are just getting the Abrams and then they're trying to learn how to use them at the lines. They have gotten months of training at this point on Abrams by the time they're being delivered. And so those crews will be very experienced by the time they actually make it to the Southern Front. And they won't really have to worry about trying to get more acclimated to the tank. They were already acclimated to it a great deal in training. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again, BC Skyman, for sponsoring that live chat. And not only that, being an old guard of this channel and helping this thing to keep on rolling. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Sylvester the Cat, longtime channel viewer who puts in a very generous $45 donation as well. And thank you very much, Sylvester, for that support. And he says, hello, Matt and Enforcer. I need your crystal ball. Will Ukraine make it to the Sea of Azov before the Rasputitsa? I grow impatient. Leaf spring tanker.
Oh, man, I'm telling you. And I've got to tell you this, Sylvester Cat. Crystal balling is pretty tough. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think the Ukrainians are going to be making it to the Azov Sea before the Rasputitsa. I don't think it's possible because we've been seeing over the since the beginning of June, when this offensive began, that they have been making ground at a somewhat slow pace. Of course, we'll see maybe at some point a Russian brigade collapse, and then there will be an opening in the line that the Ukrainians can exploit, and then speed behind the Russians and just destroy the entire Southern Front completely. But we don't know when that will be. And I have a feeling that, considering that the Rasputitsa is pretty much just coming around in a month at this point, I don't know with how the front line's been going at this point if we'll see them making it down to the Azov Sea by the time the Rasputitsa arrives. I think they'll probably be continuing the offensive during the Rasputitsa, which will be very difficult and hinder or limit their offensive abilities, but I think that's largely what we'll be seeing, at least at that point. But still, thank you so much for the support, Sylvester, and helping this channel to keep on rolling. Not only is BC Skyman and a whole bunch of other folks who supported this channel tonight old guards, you are an old guard as well, and you have been around forever. And I've got to thank you so much once again for enjoying this channel enough to support us and help us to be able to do this as our full-time job. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Junebug72, puts in a $10 donation, and thank you very much, Junebug, for that support. She says, welcome back and Slav Ukraine, and take a live chat if you can. And yes, we can, and thank you very much for that support, Junebug. And the live chat question is going to go to Happy Dragon, who says, Enforcer, are the Russians still making straight line trenches, and what would the cluster bombs do to those?
From what we can tell, the Russians have actually finally moved away from the straight line trenches. It took them about 470 days to learn to avoid building straight line trenches. So apparently they actually got some field engineers out there that kind of know what they're doing. If you were to find a straight line trench, however, at this point in the war, and you were to use cluster munitions against it, the results would probably be pretty horrendous. They really would be horrendous regardless of the shape of the trench. Even if it was a zigzag trench or a straight line trench, the effects are going to be pretty brutal, to say the least. Because the cluster bombs aren't like a high explosive where it's a singular explosive that hits somewhere, and then all of the shrapnel and explosive power travels from there. Cluster bombs get thrown everywhere, and they can end up in the zigzags of a zigzag trench, or they can end up going everywhere inside of a straight line trench. So really, the effects of a cluster bomb on a trench would be devastating regardless whether it was a straight line trench or a zigzag trench, like we're starting to see the Russians make now. So with that, I hope that does address that live chat fairly well, and thank you so much once again, Junebug72, for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Mr. Agent Man, and thank you very much for that support. He says, excuse me, do you think if Putin ordered an attack on Poland that the troops would obey it? I mean, it's suicide for the troops and the country.
I think they probably would end up obeying it, because the Russian soldiers are pretty incompetent, to say the least. I mean, you know, look at their performance in Ukraine. Some of them didn't even know they were going into Ukraine. They seriously thought they were on training exercises at the very first week of the war. So they could do a similar thing for the Polish, and then they just end up going across the border because they don't know any better. That could be something we see, and I think that the Russian army would generally follow the orders, at least as far as fighting foreign countries. Now, coups are another story, because we saw that almost everyone didn't follow their orders during the coup. But in foreign wars, I think they probably would end up following their orders. Yes, it would be suicidal. They would get slaughtered by Poland alone, and once the rest of the Western countries arrived in force, it would be a constant defensive war for the Russians after the first few weeks of fighting. So it is suicidal, but I honestly think, in my opinion, they probably would try and push into Poland, even if they know it is suicidal. They will most likely try and follow the orders. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that addresses that fairly well. I always hope that it addresses it fairly well because I'm really running off of my opinions of what would happen based off of precedents, history, and so on. So hopefully that is a fairly correct statement, and maybe, well, hopefully we won't see that come true here in the future. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Psyops, who puts in another $10 donation. And thank you very much, Psyops, for the continued support. He says, could you show Patron the sniffing bomb dog? Also, Mr. Corgi and Sheba, and Patron turned 4 today. He deserves a belly rub by Zelensky.
And let me go pull up Patron, the bomb-sniffing dog. He is a Jack Russell Terrier. And here is a picture of Patron. Oh, look at him. And look at the landline.
Look at him.
Man,
he's looking at that bomb like he's like familiar with it. Like, oh, look at that, a familiar bomb.
Man, look at that. He knows that bomb. He dug it up. But still, Patron is a very cute dog, and he did turn 4 years old today, which is crazy because I think that means he would have been like 2.5 years old when this war started at the very beginning. So he was a very young puppy when he first got into the bombing business. But now he is 4 years old. Just yesterday, I believe it was. And he's a very cute little dog. I love the dog. You don't see him much anymore because he's kind of become a teacher to kids about how to avoid explosives, bombs, and things like that around Ukraine. So we don't see him anymore in action, but he's in action in another way. And it's a very smart way for the Ukrainians to use Patron because he's probably saving more lives through educating kids than he was actually defusing the bombs himself. And also, now they're able to move these dogs a good amount of them out of danger with the demining equipment that has been brought in from the West. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support, Psyops. I hope that does address that fairly well. And I hope everyone got to enjoy seeing Patron, the bomb-sniffing dog, again on screen because it's a very cute dog. Just look at him. Very cute. And also, speaking of the Corgis, before we move on to the next one, the Corgis are doing really good. Sheba is finally growing out some of her tuft fur from when it had to be shaved after she got bitten by the snake. And Mr. Corgi, he's just been fine. I mean, Mr. Corgi is always fine. He's like a truck. He has been throwing up lately. You know, he ate something that didn't agree with him. But beyond that, Mr. Corgi is Mr. Corgi, and he is doing amazing. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support, Psyops. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Positively Hilarious, who puts in a $10 donation, and thank you very much for that support. They said, hello from Florianopolis, Brazil. Great to see your stream here in a BRICS nation, and here's some dough for your pizza fund, and keep up the great work, and take a question from the chat.
And thank you so much for the support, all the way from Brazil. And where in the world was that in Brazil again? It was Florianopolis. Here, oh, here it is, right here.
There it is, right there.
Florianopolis. What does this place look like? Oh, not bad, not bad. Now
Nice. Clever.
Man, this place is nice. Man, I'm not gonna lie, not that bad, not that bad. I like it. I think this is a really nice place. And thank you so much for the support as well. And thank you for enjoying this channel. And it's very interesting to hear that we actually have viewers like you from Brazil who are actually a part of the BRICS nations, because of course the support in BRICS nations is kind of mixed on the war in Ukraine. You know, of course, they're not completely against it, but some countries have ended up being neutral about the war, and Brazil has kind of been one of those countries. And also very interesting to hear that folks are watching from Brazil that actually enjoy our coverage of it, considering that's completely pro-Ukrainian. And so, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling and enjoying it enough that you would not only support us, but tell us how much you enjoy it as well. It means a lot to us that folks enjoy this channel and help us to keep this thing rolling. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the live chat question they requested goes to Leonce Pierre Chevalier of the LSA, who says, if the Wagner troops are really under Putin's control, does that mean that Ukraine is in danger of an attack from the north?
It doesn't really mean that, because from what we can tell, they're actually spread north to south along the Polish border instead of east to west along the Ukrainian border. So they're actually kind of in the wrong axes right now to launch a northern offensive on Ukraine, and it appears that this is some kind of an attempt to draw the Polish or NATO into the war or start to escalate things with them, possibly for some kind of a diplomatic means. So they wouldn't be able to launch a northern attack right now with how the forces are laid out, but it may be entirely possible that they invade Poland instead, and we'll have to really wait and see on that one. But with that, I thank you so much once again for sponsoring that live chat, and I hope we were able to address it fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to João Silva, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, Silva, for that support. They said this week it gave me anxiety. And did it do the same for you? No. And just get a chat question. And thanks for the great channel.
And I thank you so much for the support. And this week hasn't really given me that much anxiety. It has been the war as usual, and of course there's escalation going on, but usually this escalation subsides, so I don't really freak out much about it until it actually does become serious at this point, because this has happened so many times, it seems, and this may be another one of those times, you know, where things just heat up all over and then they die down. So it hasn't been that anxiety-inducing for me, honestly, so hopefully it has been that anxiety-inducing for everyone else. But thank you so much once again for the support, and we will make sure to get a live chat. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and the live chat question goes to Joe Demet, who says, if he attacks Poland, there will be a massive conventional attack from all directions. And what say you?
I would say there would be a massive conventional attack from all directions, especially from the NATO countries. You would see attacks originating from the Baltics, from Finland, from Poland. You would probably see NATO forces enter Ukraine and begin to fight inside of Ukraine, because at that point, nothing's off the table. So I would say yes. If we were to see the Russians attack Poland, they would be dealing with a multi-front war. They would have to fight up in the Arkhangelsk region, they would have to fight in the Baltics, they would have to fight in Poland, and they would also have to fight a lot harder inside of Ukraine. And we can already see that they aren't even able to do that well, so much less on a 1,000 or more than 1,000 mile long front line. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for sponsoring that live chat, Silva, and helping this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Putin will hang in the middle of the Kremlin, who puts in a $6 donation and says, I say hello now, in case I can't join you all soon.
And thank you so much for saying hello. I think that was our first super chat of the stream tonight. And I got to thank you so much for enjoying this channel enough to help this channel to keep on rolling. And I also got to thank you for hopping in tonight a little bit. I don't know if you're still here right now. If you are, hello. If you're not, oh man. But still, thank you so much once again for the support. And hello to you once again. It's great to have you around. And I thank you so much for watching tonight. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Dark Warrior 137, who puts in a 5 and says, Kremlin staff said, Putin. Ukrainians wish to discuss terms of surrender. Great. Put them on the phone. No need. They're just outside the door.
Yeah, oh, that was a good one. I didn't see that one coming, actually. That was a pretty good one.
Clever.
Oh, my.
Excuse me.
Oh, my. That was a big call.
My.
But still, thank you so much for the support and throwing in a pretty good joke. That was a pretty good one. I didn't even see the punchline there until it came. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for sharing with us a pretty good joke. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
And our next one goes to CK Bold, who puts in a 5 and says, take a live chat question. And we sure will, CK Bold. And thank you, as always, for asking for the usual. And the live chat question goes to Austin H., who says, what did Ukraine get besides Russia's promise to not attack when giving up their nukes?
Can you reread that one again?
They said, what did Ukraine get besides Russia promised to not attack when giving up their nukes?
They didn't really get anything else in return. They also got an agreement from Britain and the United States that all three countries would continue to support Ukrainian sovereignty into the future, but it was a memorandum. It wasn't a binding treaty, so nobody really had to follow that. And also the Ukrainians were kind of in a catch-22 because they didn't have the funds to maintain all of the nuclear weapons that were inside of their territory, so they kind of had to denuclearize them, and that treaty was a way to make sure that they were denuclearized so that way they wouldn't fall into the hands of terrorists or other organizations around the world. And so with that, I hope that does address that live chat fairly well. And thank you so much, CK Bold, for always throwing in that $5 support and always asking for the usual, because we know exactly what you were coming in and asking for every single time, which is a live chat question. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and I hope I was able to answer that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Ignis, Lord of Flames, who puts in a 5 and says, do you think the situations between Russia and Turkey, what the hell was that? Something on the floor. But do you think the situations between Russia and Turkey and Poland will escalate, or will eventually pass like the nuclear power plant situation did?
I think my inclination is that it'll pass like the nuclear power plant situation did. This may eventually de-escalate because the Russians understand what a conventional war will lead to, and NATO also understands what a conventional war will lead to as well. So I have a feeling that we'll probably see that this is somewhat avoided, but it is certainly a very tense standoff right now as we speak. We're looking at the Turkish Navy possibly providing armed escorts in the Black Sea, which is pretty escalatory, and we're also seeing the Russians building up forces on the Belarusian border, which is also very escalatory as well. So on both ends, it's escalatory, but usually these escalatory actions lead to some kind of agreement or some kind of amicable solution by the end of it. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Robert Nicholson, who puts in a 5 and does not leave a comment, sadly, but thank you very much, Robert, for that support and helping to keep us running. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from KM Gaming, who says, say they attack Poland, NATO will activate Article 5, and NATO at war, which would be the start of World War III, and does that mean Ukraine could then join NATO?
I think at that point, there wouldn't be an official joining of NATO to Ukraine, but there would be some kind of a joint agreement in between Ukraine and NATO that they would be allowed to fight inside of Ukraine against the Russians. I think that would most likely be the case, because the one thing that is a little difficult is to get through the paperwork and everything of trying to have a new member join in peacetime. I have a feeling in wartime that would be next to impossible. So there would most likely be some kind of an agreement or a pact made in between the two, but you probably wouldn't see Ukraine actually join NATO during that time. So honestly, I would have to say probably not, but we would see that NATO would be fighting inside of Ukraine. That is for sure. That would be a definite guarantee. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support KM Gaming and helping this channel to keep on running. Very good question, by the way. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, excuse me, didn't mean to say it that loud, but up next we have a $10 super chat from Scott Kemp. And Scott does not leave a comment, but thank you very much, Scott, for always being a longtime channel viewer and supporting the channel, and we do appreciate the support very much. We also have a super chat from Craig Blattell, who puts in a 5 and says Putin's mostly right about Poland's actions during the Russian Civil War versus Lithuania, etc., but it still has no bearing on today's borders.
And I would agree completely, and I thank you so much for the support, because Poland in the Russian Civil War was a totally different entity than it is today. Poland didn't even exist throughout the entirety of the Second World War. It was completely defeated in 1939, and some small fragments of it ended up fighting with the British. But beyond that, the Polish didn't even exist. So they may as well have been a new country after the war, and especially considering that their borders were completely reshaped by the time of the late 1940s. That is something that I just think is silly to try and draw in, is what they did to Lithuania in 1919, because it's a totally different time. It was a totally different Poland then, and that doesn't even relate to what's happening now. Because we're going to start talking about the sins of Poland. You can talk about all the sins of Russia, the Holodomor, the 2 Chechen wars, the war in Afghanistan, the Purge, everyone going to the gulags. I mean, you know, the Russians have a pretty bad track history, so I don't know why in the world they're going to bring up something in between the Polish and the Lithuanians like they did. But with that, thank you so much for the support, and I agree with you completely on that, because it just makes absolutely no sense. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And up next, shout out to Marcus Kennedy for putting in a 2, as well as BC Skyman for also putting in a 2, and both of them did not leave comments. But thank you very much, Marcus and BC, for that support as always, and to keep us running. We also have a $4 super chat from Burnaby Alex, who says, how long will it be for the oligarchs to realize they're losing money with Putin and to replace him?
It probably won't be that much longer, because Gazprom did create a PMC a while ago, which shows that they may be trying to get ready for a power play inside of Russia if Russia becomes even weaker. I think that it'll probably take another 8 months or so before we start to see the oligarchs getting openly hostile against the Russian government and possibly trying to fund mercenary groups to hopefully overthrow the Russian government with. So I would say it's not going to be now, but it may be a little bit later in the future. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat goes to Nicholas Dice, who puts in a 2 and says, dance while orc tanks burn.
Dance, bled, dance. Oh, bled, I can't dance, I don't have legs. Lieutenant Dan, you don't have legs, bled. But anyways, thank you so much for the support, and perhaps we will dance. We're not good at dancing, by the way. We're both terrible at dancing. But with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a super chat from Julian Lawson, who puts in a $10 donation, and thank you very much, Julian, for that support. He says, I love you guys and support Ukraine all the way to victory. And on a side note, y'all are too young to be sick all the time. There's probably mold or something in your basement. Invest in ventilation. And I have to say, Julian, there is actually no mold in the basement. I can guarantee you of that. But one thing that I can guarantee you as well is that I picked up a rough bug, and so has my father. So we've been struggling with that all month long. And if it continues beyond a month, I will have to break down and go see the physicians, which is a dreaded thing for me. Hopefully I can, I'm telling you, not drop dead in the meantime. But, seriously, though, I did feel a lot better today. And I also started off the stream really strong. But I have to say that my energy just isn't there still. I was able to last for about an hour and a half before feeling a little bit tired. Like right now, I'm really getting tired. But, going pretty strong. Able to make my video today pretty easy as well earlier. So I am recovering. That's a good sign, but still got a little ways to go. But thank you very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I thank you so much for the support, Julian, as well. And we're not actually that sick much, because think about it. Over 513 days, the first time anyone's ever gotten sick on this channel, it was Matthew. And I actually haven't gotten sick yet. I just kind of felt bad for, I think, one day at the beginning of when he got sick, and I think a few days ago as well, I started feeling kind of bad on stream. But I've never actually felt dead terrible, just downright bad like Matthew's been feeling, because Matthew has been terribly sick, like very, very sick. Y'all don't even know how badly sick he's been in the background, but it has been very bad. On the other hand, I haven't really been affected by it much at all, which I'm very lucky to say that that's the case, because I would hate to be sick, because I'm the one who has to talk for almost sometimes 3 hours on the show, so it does get pretty tough. We don't have mold in the basement as well. The basement is quite nice here, but it's every once in a while people just get sick, I suppose. Matthew got sick, and hopefully we don't get that sick anymore from this point forward. But with that, thank you so much once again for support, Julian. I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much for caring and being concerned as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next we have a super chat from Rick Tarius, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, Rick, for that support. He says, looking to help a friend, and he puts in some code there, and he says, thank you, fellows, for what you do.
And thank you so much for the support, Rick Tarius, and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for enjoying what we do and supporting us so that we can keep this thing going. We have been keeping this thing rolling for 513 days now. We've only missed a few days over this channel history. I think at this point, we may be up to 6 days missed out of 513 continuous days of coverage. And it's been thanks to folks like you who support this channel that makes it possible for us to do this almost non-stop, like some kind of a machine. And I've got to thank you so much once again for enjoying this channel and supporting it and helping it to keep on running, because folks like you, Rictarius, have made this thing possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and with that being said, that was our last super chat for now.
Yeah.
So we're moving on to our live chat questions. And I'll tell you, there's no cap. I don't cap when I'm sick. But moving on to our Morse code decoders of the night, we have Mark Hodges, Cife, Cliff Simonson, Earl Bernew, and Paul Scholes. They said tonight's Morse code cipher is keep them going, LSA, and let Ukraine know that we all care for them.
And that's the sound of money. And y'all got that right on the nail. And I hope that y'all continue to support Ukraine entirely and let them know, not just on this channel, but everywhere y'all go. Because a lot of people over there in Ukraine, they love to know that everyone around the world continues to support them in this war. And so thank y'all for getting that Morse code message correct again tonight. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving on to our live chat questions. Up first, we have one from Laurie Fox, who says, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Poland NATO, and don't we have troops there?
You are not wrong, so I can't correct you there. And yes, we do have U.S. troops inside of Poland. There are NATO troops as a whole inside of Poland in the thousands, or maybe even the tens of thousands. I don't think we have an exact number on that. But yes, Poland is a part of NATO, and there are other NATO forces inside of Poland. So not really a smart idea to start threatening the Poles. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And we also have a live chat question from Plexus Gaming, who says, with today's events regarding Turkey and Poland, how long before NATO is drawn into the conflict?
I don't know, because it always looks like we're about to go to war, like in situations like these, but somehow everyone is able to avoid the open conflict. So I don't really know. I don't know when we would go to war. It's a crystal balling, which is something I'm not really a big fan of. We may be going to war next week. We may be going to war next year. We may never go to war. Who knows? Because we were able to avoid open war for 50 to 60 years of the Cold War. And if we were able to do that during those times, I think we could possibly try and avoid war now. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Brett Smashy, who says, what do you think will be the impact of the continuing purge on the Russian army capability and morale?
What happened? Reread the line.
Oh, goodness. What do you think will be the impact of the continuing purge on the Russian army capability, and morale?
I think that the purge, well, really, the purge has only affected Surovikin so far. Everyone else has kind of popped up in the public again, except for Surovikin. He's still disappeared. So I honestly think that it may not really have that much of an effect on morale, because really nobody's been that greatly affected by it. They apparently took them all into a back room, schooled them, and then threw them out, and Surovikin's really the only one that's missing. And I don't really think a lot of people were big fans of Surovikin anyways, because he was kind of thrown into the same camp that Shoigu and another Propasna was thrown into. So I think it's not really going to have that much of an effect now, seeing how this purge has kind of been going. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Avari Mandabratis, who says, doesn't this deployment of the Black Sea Fleet increase exposure to Ukrainian air and sea drone attacks and sink 'em Russian vessels?
Russian vessels. And yes, it does expose them to possible Ukrainian anti-ship activities. And I would have to say that that could be a pretty big detriment to the Russians. That also means that they'll probably try and intercept cargo ships almost down at the very end of Ukrainian waters, somewhere in this area here, instead of getting closer to shore. Hell, that might even really be difficult for them there, because the Ukrainians set up anti-ship batteries in this area. There's really nothing the Russians could do to get close and actually try and seize those cargo ships. So, really, yeah, it will be very dangerous and huge jeopardy for the Russian Black Sea Fleet if they try anything like that. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and with that being said, up next we have a $2 super chat from PR Beck, and no comment to address, but thank you very much for that support. Also, I saw a live chat question I'm going to take, which says, it's from Jacob Cav, by the way. He says, are there any updates to the situation in North Korea? And we have learned the identity of the soldier. I think we said that the other day. The fella was apparently on some kind of tour of the border or something like that, and he was facing that disciplinary action. He bolted across the border, and the North Koreans whisked him into a van and then took him off to some unknown location. The North Koreans will not pick up the phone and answer the U.S.'s calls regarding that soldier, and we don't know where he is. So he's most likely being interrogated, taken into custody, and he hasn't made any public statements in North Korea yet, and it's unclear exactly what the North Koreans intend to do with him. But obviously, bad decision, and he's not in good shape. He'd been much better off just facing whatever consequences he had in the military instead of running across the border into the most isolated country in the world. But that's the answer to that question. Also, Enforcer, I think we'll just have to answer 3 more because I am starting to wear out a little bit. And if we have any hope of running a stream tomorrow, we might have to call it early tonight.
All right. And so with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
Excuse me. And the third to last question of the night goes to Damien Ballou, who says, Putin said today that some old Soviet equipment were better than the new Western equipment that has been given to Ukraine. And what does Enforcer think of those words by Putin?
That's a flat-out lie, because anything that's older by decades is technologically going to be worse off. That is just silly. That's just stupid to say. So with that, I hope that addresses that fairly well. There's not really much to say rather than that's a laughable joke of a statement. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Ben Reinhardt. What are your thoughts on Ukraine saying Russian ships in the Black Sea are military targets?
They kind of are under maritime law. If you're at war with a country and any ships are trying to enter their port, they are strategic targets, and they are considered vessels that may be bringing equipment to support the war effort. So they are actually targets under the rules of war. So it's not really out of the question to say something like that. It's actually pretty normal in times of war. And so with that, I hope that does answer that fairly well. And we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person to put in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is JC Atkins. And JC, You are getting my very valuable breath at the moment to try to get this out. And JC said, do you have any info? Excuse me, or any thoughts on Americans wanting to form a 21st century flying tigers to fight in the skies for the Ukrainians?
I do. I think that's a pretty neat idea. That's something that has happened all the time in wars. We saw the Flying Tigers in Asia. We also saw the Eagle Squadron in the UK. I think that's something that is historically a precedent, and I also think that that's something that we should see here in the modern war as well. There's really nothing that one could say against it, because it is something historically that has existed long before the United States would ever get involved in wars. For example, the Eagle Squadron and the Flying Tigers. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. Once again, a little bit shorter than normal, but still, Matthew is trying to get better, and as you can tell, Matthew is starting to suffer from tuberculosis over there, so we are going to be making sure to round this thing out. But thank you all so much once again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure to know that we were able to run the news for 7,100 of y'all. 7,100 of y'all watched at the peak tonight, and we were completely honored to run the news for each and every one of y'all. If y'all did enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because it helps this channel to keep on growing and helps it to reach more people. And also make sure to share us around, because we always love to know that people enjoy this channel enough to share it with friends and let their friends know what we do, and also to help us to continue to support Ukraine. And so with that, good night, good luck, stay safe, take care, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army.
And good night, LSA, Slava Ukraine, and
Yes.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.